Let's start this session with a short 15-minute practice of Shamatha. So again, you get to choose your object and it'll be silent, so you prepare your body and mind in your own time and then move to your object when you're ready. in the first day of this retreat, I talked about the training in Shamatha, and part of that was what was called the preconditions, how to set up our life in such a way to support this practice. So that's what I'd like to look at now, and then after the presentation, some time for some more questions about the Shamatha practice. They're called the 6 preconditions, and they're normally presented in the meditation texts in terms of 6 things or preconditions to help set up a conducive environment for Shamatha practice, or Shamatha retreat in particular. But I think we can apply these to daily life in general. So to look at these, also in his Attention and Evolution, Alan Wallace also talks about these. So I'd like to begin by reading a little bit from Attention Revolution on page 60 or 50. He says, "When I lead Shamatha seminars, I like to think of them as expeditions rather than retreats. The word retreat has the connotation not only of withdrawal but also of defeat. And that certainly isn't the spirit of such practice. The word expedition, on the other hand, suggests adventure, conquest and exploration. The Latin roots of the word have to do with extricating yourself, literally stepping out of some situation in which you've gotten stuck. In the practice of Shamatha, we discover how deeply our minds are trapped in the twin ruts of excitation and laxity. In the Buddhist tradition, a mind trapped in these ruts is said to be dysfunctional, and in order to make it serviceable, it is helpful to step out of our normal activities, seek out a spacious sense of solitude, and explore the frontiers of the mind. This expedition doesn't require blind faith or allegiance, or allegiance to any religious creed or metaphysical belief system. Over the past 3 millennia, contemplatives from various Asian cultures with diverse belief systems have followed the path of Shamatha to its culmination, and they have reported their findings. We don't need to accept their claims simply on their own authority, but if we are inspired by earlier accounts of the benefits of this practice, we may venture forth on this path to see for ourselves whether we can achieve the results of the contemplative explorers who have preceded us. There are great adventures ahead, but also perils and dead ends. Sometimes the path is clear, but now and again it may seem to disappear altogether. The purpose of relying on those who know this path from their own experience is to save time. 6 prerequisites for sustained rigorous training are set forth in many Indian and Tibetan Buddhist manuals. These are some of the essential causes and conditions that will produce the fruit of Shamatha. So let's have a look at the 6. The first is what's called the outer condition, and it's talking about having a supportive environment. So let's see what Alan Wallace says in the Attention Revolution. He says, "It's important to practice in a safe, quiet and agreeable location, optimally with a few other like-minded people. This should be a place where food, clothing and other necessities are easily obtained. Finding such an environment sounds simple in principle, but in practice it can be very difficult, especially if you try to devote yourself to practice for many months on end. So, as he said, it's particularly if we're going to do a retreat, personal retreat on this, it's not so easy to find very good conditions to do a retreat. But also, I think, as I said, these 6 preconditions we can apply to daily life as well. But in the context of retreat, when we talk about this supportive environment, normally they mention 5 things. The first is necessities, that we have easy access to the basic necessities of food and water and so forth. The second one is a safe place, and in some of the old meditation texts in the commentary for this, it said something like, make sure it's a place that has no lions or tigers. Might be a bit dangerous if there's lions and tigers around, because sometimes they used to do retreats in forests, and I think in many places historically there were lions and tigers, so not a good idea to meditate where they're around. The third one was a healthy place, meaning a place that's not full of disease and so forth. The fourth one is often referred to as good friends. And I think this is, for daily life, brings up the idea of Sangha, spiritual community. And I think this is very important, that if we want to meditate and follow a better direction in our life and change our habits and so forth, I think we need to find Sangha, because if we have this idea that, well, I can do this on my own, I'm sort of an independent sort of person, I can really do this by myself, I think you're going to find it very difficult, if not impossible. And I know from my own personal experience, like many years ago when I first came into contact with Buddhism, and I thought there's some really good ideas here, and I went back home, and at the time I was living in Australia, so I went back home and was enthusiastic about meditating and changing my life. But basically, for 2 years, nothing happened. I just got swept up in my old habits. There was no centres anywhere where I was living. There's no one really around me who was interested in doing any of this sort of things. So I was sort of on my own, and I found it too difficult to go against my old habits, and I had no support. So that was my experience. It was only after 2 years that I found myself in a new environment with some Sangha around that I really started to be able to do something. So I think this is very important, something we really need to pay attention to, and find that Sangha. And that Sangha, of course, can take on a form of a organised form of a. I think the battery's going. Maybe. No. That Sangha can take on a organised form of like an organised Buddhist centre, or it can take a more informal form, just a group of friends. But whatever form it takes, I think we need to find these like-minded people, get connected with them, and meet together regularly, maybe on a weekly basis, maybe even a little bit of meditation together, discussion together. That way you can support them, they can support you, and you feel like you're not on your own, and you're going against everyone else, sort of thing, trying to move in a different direction. So I think this is something very, very important. The last point for supportive environment was well situated. So again, if we're particularly doing a retreat, we want to be in a place that's quiet and not too many people around. But also, of course, where we live, if we're trying to meditate and it's very noisy, that's also not so optimal. So that's the first point, the supportive environment. So that's like the outer condition. The other 5 are more inner conditions. So let's have a look at those other 5. So the second and third sort of go together. And that is few desires and being content. And both of these are with respect to material things like money and possessions and so forth. So few desires is with respect to things we don't have. and being content is with respect to things that we do have. Because if we're wanting more and more wealth, more and more things, possessions and better house, better car, better everything, we're going to put all our time and energy in that direction. We're not going to have any time or energy to meditate and develop ourselves as a person. So let's again see what says in Attention Revolution about this. So page 52. The first of these two prerequisites refers to having few desires for things you don't have, and the second refers to being content with what you do have. Without these two qualities, your mind will never settle down in the practice. You'll be constantly thinking of things you want but you don't have, and you will fret about your present circumstances are inadequate in one way or another. This does not mean you must quell your desire for happiness, but it is necessary to refocus your aspirations on transforming your own mind as the means to genuine well-being. And for this to happen, you must see the limitations of a life driven by such mundane pursuits as wealth, luxury, entertainment, and reputation. All these circumstances can give you is a temporary spurt of pleasure that tapers off as soon as the pleasurable stimulus stops. Mental balance is the gateway to finding genuine happiness, and shamatha is the key that opens that gate. The fourth one is few activities. Meaning we need to simplify our life. Now, many of us, or in our modern world, of course, have very busy lives, lots of stuff going on in our life. And often, you know, I hear people say, well, I'd like to meditate, but I simply don't have time. I don't think that's ever a valid excuse. It's probably true that given our current activity schedule, we don't have time. But we need to really look at our life and prioritise our life. So, of course, some of the activities we do on a daily basis are necessary. You know, most of us probably need to work at some level to be able to support ourselves and so forth. Also, some of us maybe have some family responsibilities, and maybe some of us have some other responsibilities as well. But above and beyond those essential responsibilities and activities, we tend to fill up our day with lots of other things. And we tend to do that for two reasons. One is that it's often felt like in our modern society, if we're not doing something, we're not being productive. So we need to do something, just do anything to be productive. And of course, if we're sitting quietly and not doing anything, that sort of really forces us to really look at our mind a little bit, and we don't really like what we see, so we just sort of distract ourselves so we don't have to look at our chaotic mind. So, of course, one way to simplify our life would be to forcibly cut things out of our life.